You can't satisfy me.
You have no idea what I'm capable of, Lil Bry.
She was 18, trembling in her wedding gown, forced into the arms of a ruthless 40-year-old Korean Mafia boss, tears streaming as she stood like cattle sold to pay her father's debt. Rebellious and defiant, she mocked in his ear. "Everyone says you're impotent, old man." The entire Seoul underworld whispered the same thing. Korea's most feared mafia boss was broken, a monster with money but nothing else. She'd counted on that rumor to survive her wedding night, but that night he shoved her against the bedroom wall, pressed his body against hers until she felt exactly how wrong those whispers were, and growled, "By morning you'll be begging me to stop." Welcome to K-fairytales stories, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Beauty Adeyemi had learned to count the days until her father's debts would finally consume them all. 37 days. That's how long they'd had before the collectors came. She'd watched her mother cry herself hollow, watched her younger brothers grow thinner, watched her father disappear into bottles and betting dens trying to win back what he'd already lost twice over. The apartment in Itaewon grew smaller with each passing week, the walls closing in like a fist around their throats. She was 18 and already felt ancient, carrying the weight of a family she couldn't save with her university entrance exams and part-time convenience store wages. The men came on a Tuesday, 3 of them, wearing suits that cost more than her father's yearly salary, moving through their cramped living room like they owned it. Because they did, they owned everything now. Her father's gambling debts had transferred ownership of their entire lives to the Kang family organization, and everyone in Seoul knew what that meant. You didn't borrow from the Kang family, you sold them your soul on an installment plan. The leader was young, maybe 30, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow and eyes that had seen too much. He spoke in Korean so perfect it sounded like a threat. "Your father owes 600 million won. He has 3 options. Pay in full by Friday, disappear and we hunt down everyone he's ever loved, or offer acceptable collateral." Beauty's mother collapsed into sobs. Her father stared at the floor like he could dig through it and escape into the earth. Her brothers, 9 and 11, huddled together on the couch, trying to make themselves invisible. And Beauty stood there in her school uniform, hands clenched into fists, knowing with absolute certainty what acceptable collateral meant in a world run by men like these. "How much?" she heard herself ask. The scarred man's eyes shifted to her, cataloging her curves, her youth, her desperation. "For what? For me? How much would I pay off?" The room went silent. Her mother's sobs caught in her throat. Her father finally looked up, horror spreading across his face. "No, Beauty, no. We'll find another way." "There is no other way," she said quietly, still staring at the scarred man. "Is there?" He smiled, and it was the ugliest thing she'd ever seen. "That depends on what you're offering." 3 days later, Beauty stood in a private room at the Paradise Hotel in Gangnam, wearing a white dress that cost more than her family's rent for a year. The dress was traditional hanbok silk, custom-made to fit her curves exactly, modest and expensive and absolutely suffocating. She could barely breathe through the embroidered collar, could barely see through the tears blurring her vision. This wasn't a wedding, this was a transaction. She was merchandise being transferred from one owner to another, and everyone in the room knew it. The officiant spoke too quickly, his words sliding past her like water. She didn't catch most of it, didn't care to. All she knew was that when he finished, she would belong to Kang Min-ho, the head of the Kang family organization, a man she'd never met but whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. They said he was 40 years old. They said he'd killed his first rival at 15. They said he controlled half of Seoul's underground economy through violence and precision. They said a lot of things, but the most important rumor was the one she'd clung to like a lifeline. They said he was impotent, damaged, broken below the waist from some old injury or illness, a man with all the money and power in the world but unable to consummate any of it. That was the only reason she'd agreed to this. The only reason she could stand here in this beautiful dress, in this beautiful room, and not completely shatter. If the rumors were true, she could survive this marriage. She could play the dutiful wife, endure his presence, and keep her body her own. It was a prison, but prisons had rules, and rules could be navigated. The doors at the end of the room opened, every head turned, and Kang Min-ho entered like a storm given human form. He wasn't what she expected. The rumors had painted him as monstrous, cruel, physically intimidating. But the man walking toward her with measured steps was something else entirely. Tall, lean, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him like violence. His face was all sharp angles and harder edges, cheekbones carved from stone, jaw set with the kind of authority that made people instinctively step back. His hair was swept back from his forehead, silver threading through the black at his temples in a way that made him look distinguished rather than old. His eyes found hers across the distance and held, dark and calculating and absolutely terrifying in their intensity. He looked every bit the predator the rumors claimed, except for one detail that made Beauty's breath catch. He moved with perfect fluidity, no hint of weakness, no suggestion of physical limitation. Every step was controlled, purposeful, radiating a kind of contained power that made the air around him feel dangerous. By the time he reached her side, Beauty's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to hide it. He stood next to her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive and dark and overwhelming. The officiant began speaking again, but she couldn't focus on the words, could only feel the heat radiating from the man beside her, the way his presence seemed to fill the entire room despite his stillness. When the officiant asked if she took Kang Min-ho as her husband, Beauty's voice came out as a broken whisper, "I do." When the officiant asked the same of Min-ho, his response was low and certain, "I do." And then it was done. The officiant pronounced them married. The handful of witnesses, all members of Min-ho's organization, offered perfunctory applause. And Beauty stood there feeling like she'd just signed her own death warrant in silk and ceremony. Min-ho's hand found hers, his grip firm but not painful as he led her from the room. His touch burned like electricity, making her skin crawl with awareness she didn't want. They walked through corridors of expensive wallpaper and crystal chandeliers, her heels clicking against marble floors, his security detail following at a respectful distance. No one spoke. The silence was suffocating. They reached a private elevator. Min-ho pressed a button for the penthouse floor, and as the doors closed, sealing them in together, Beauty felt the walls of her new prison close around her completely. The elevator rose smoothly. She stared at her reflection in the polished steel doors, seeing a stranger wearing her face. A bride, a wife, a purchased woman trying not to fall apart. Min-ho's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You've been crying." It wasn't a question. She didn't answer. Didn't trust herself to speak without her voice breaking completely. He shifted slightly, and she felt his attention on her like a physical weight. "Look at me." She couldn't. Wouldn't. Kept staring at that distorted reflection, at the girl who'd sold herself to save her family. Beauty. Her name in his mouth felt wrong, intimate, like he had the right to speak it. She finally turned her head, met his eyes, and felt the impact of his gaze all the way down to her bones. "You don't need to be afraid," he said quietly. "I'm not a monster." The words were meant to comfort, but they landed hollow, because men who had to tell you they weren't monsters usually were, and Beauty had learned long ago that power and cruelty went hand in hand in worlds like this. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. It was everything she'd imagined and worse. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline, furniture that cost more than her family's life savings, art on the walls that belonged in museums. Everything was pristine, expensive, empty. A gilded cage designed to hold prisoners who came wrapped in wedding gowns. Min-ho walked ahead of her, his movements fluid and controlled. He gestured to a door on the left. "That's your room. You'll have your own space. Privacy." There was a pause, weighted with meaning. "Unless you prefer otherwise." Beauty's throat tightened. The rumors. Maybe they were true. Maybe he really couldn't. And that's why he was offering her separate quarters, sparing them both the humiliation of a wedding night that couldn't happen. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely audible. "For what?" "For the consideration." Min-ho turned to look at her, and something flickered across his face, too fast to identify. "Consideration," he repeated, tasting the word. That's an interesting way to describe it. Before she could respond, he crossed to a bar cart and poured himself whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. He didn't offer her any, didn't ask if she wanted anything, just stood there drinking while she stood frozen in the center of the room, still wearing her wedding dress, still trying to figure out how to survive the next hour, let alone the rest of her life. "You should know," Minho said finally, still facing the windows, his back to her, "that I'm aware of what you think this marriage is, what you believe about me, the rumors you've heard." Beauty's pulse quickened. "I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me." His tone didn't rise, but the command in it was absolute. "I've built my reputation on information. I know exactly what Soul's underworld whispers about me. I know what you're counting on to make this bearable." He turned then, and the look in his eyes made her want to run. But there was nowhere to run to. Nowhere that wasn't owned by him. "They say I'm broken," he continued, walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. "That I can't perform, that I'm impotent, useless, a man with power everywhere except where it matters." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Is that what you've been telling yourself? That you're safe because I can't touch you?" Beauty's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat, because yes, that was exactly what she'd been telling herself. That was the only thing that had gotten her through the ceremony without collapsing. Minho's hand came up slowly, giving her time to flinch away, but she was frozen, unable to move as his fingers traced the line of her jaw with devastating gentleness. "You're 18 years old," he murmured, his voice dropping to something dark and intimate. "Young enough to believe every rumor you hear, old enough to know better." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and she gasped at the contact, at the heat of it. "Let me tell you something about rumors, Beauty. I start most of them." The words took a moment to penetrate. When they did, ice flooded her veins. "What? I control what people say about me, what they think, what they believe." His hand slid from her face to her throat, not squeezing, just resting there, a reminder of how easily he could hurt her if he wanted. The impotence rumor, the whispers about injury and illness, I planted those years ago because weak men are underestimated, and underestimated men win wars. "No," Beauty breathed, denial and horror mixing in her chest. "You're lying." "Am I?" His other hand found her waist, pulling her closer, and she felt it then, felt exactly how wrong the rumors were, felt the hard evidence of his desire pressing against her through layers of expensive fabric. His eyes never left hers, watching every flicker of realization cross her face, every moment of her world rewriting itself into something far more terrifying. "By morning," he said quietly, his lips so close to hers she could taste his breath, "you'll be begging me to stop." And then he released her, stepped back, picked up his whiskey glass, and walked toward the master bedroom like he hadn't just destroyed the only hope she'd been clinging to. Beauty stood there, trembling, understanding with absolute clarity that she'd been wrong about everything. This wasn't a prison with merciful rules. This was a cage with a predator, and she'd just realized she was prey. Later that night, Beauty locked herself in the guest room Minho had assigned her, her whole body shaking with reaction. She'd stripped out of the wedding dress, left it pooled on the floor like a shed skin, and now sat on the edge of the bed in borrowed silk pajamas, trying to process what had just happened. He'd lied, planted rumors, controlled narratives, and she'd believed every word, because believing them was the only way to survive agreeing to this marriage. "Stupid," she whispered to herself, digging her nails into her palms. So stupid. She should have known, should have questioned, should have done literally anything except walk blindly into this trap. But what choice had she really had? Her family's debt was real. The threats were real. The alternatives were her father's death or her brothers being sold into labor or worse. At least this way, her family was safe. At least this way, she was the only one suffering. A soft knock on the door made her jump. She didn't answer, barely breathed, hoping he'd go away. But Minho's voice came through the wood, calm and patient. "I'm not going to force myself into your room. You have my word. That's not how this works." "Then how does this work?" she called back, hating how her voice shook. "Because from where I'm sitting, you bought me, you own me, you can do whatever you want." Silence. "Then, I can, yes, but I won't. Not tonight. You need time to adjust. To understand what this marriage actually is. Tomorrow, we'll talk. Tomorrow, you'll start learning the rules. Sleep, beauty, you're safe tonight. His footsteps retreated, leaving her alone with her fear and confusion. Safe. The word felt like a mockery. How could she be safe when the most dangerous man in Seoul had just proven he'd been lying to everyone, including her, for years? How could she sleep knowing that tomorrow might bring the wedding night she'd thought she'd avoided? But exhaustion eventually claimed her, pulling her under into restless dreams of cages and predators and wedding dresses that turned to chains. The next morning, Beauty woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee. She dressed quickly in the clothes that had been left in the guest room closet, designer pieces in her exact size that she'd never chosen. Everything fit perfectly, which meant he'd been planning this for longer than 3 days. He'd known her measurements, known her size, had prepared this cage long before she'd agreed to enter it. She found him in the dining room, reading a tablet while eating breakfast. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. Sit, eat. We need to discuss expectations. Beauty sat, but didn't touch the food spread before her. I'm not hungry. You will be. Eat. It wasn't a request. She took a piece of toast, bit into it mechanically, tasting nothing. Minho set down his tablet, folded his hands on the table, and looked at her with those dark, calculating eyes. Here's how this works. You are my wife. Legally, socially, in every way that matters to my organization, you will live here. You will attend events with me. You will present yourself as content and loyal. In return, your family's debt is erased. They're protected. No one in my organization or any rivals will touch them. Do you understand? Yes, Beauty whispered. Good. Minho leaned back in his chair, still watching her. Second, you have freedom within reason. You can leave the penthouse with security. You can pursue your education. You can have your own interests. But you cannot betray me, embarrass me, or attempt to leave this marriage. If you do any of those things, the protection over your family ends. Do you understand? Yes. Third. He paused, and something shifted in his expression. What happens between us physically is a negotiation, not a command. I won't force you, but I also won't pretend I don't want you. You're beautiful, young, and mine. Eventually, you'll stop fighting this. Eventually, you'll come to me willingly. Beauty's hands clenched in her lap. You're very sure of yourself. I'm very sure of human nature. Fear becomes familiarity. Familiarity becomes comfort. Comfort becomes desire. It's only a matter of time. And if I never stop fighting, then we have a very interesting marriage ahead of us. He stood, buttoned his suit jacket with practiced ease. I have meetings today. Yoon will be your security detail. He'll take you anywhere you want to go within Seoul. I suggest you use the time to think about your situation, about what resistance actually costs you. He left without another word, and Beauty sat there, surrounded by expensive furniture and untouched food, feeling the walls of her cage settle more firmly into place. A few days later, Beauty had developed a routine. She woke early, ate breakfast alone, spent her days either studying for university entrance exams or exploring Seoul with Yoon trailing behind her like a well-dressed shadow. She avoided Minho when possible, spoke to him in monosyllables when necessary, and retreated to her guest room every night, locking the door even though she knew it was symbolic at best. He didn't push, didn't demand, just watched her with those dark eyes whenever they were in the same room, his attention a constant weight she couldn't escape. It was almost worse than if he'd forced the issue, because the waiting was its own kind of torture, making her constantly aware of him, constantly anticipating the moment he'd decide negotiation time was over. On the 5th day, he came home early from whatever business kept him away most days. Beauty was in the living room, textbooks spread across the coffee table, trying to focus on calculus when her entire life was chaos. He walked in, loosening his tie, looking tired in a way she hadn't seen before. Rough day, she found herself saying, then immediately regretted the casual tone. It suggested familiarity, suggested they were something other than captor and captive. Minho glanced at her, something like surprise flickering across his face. You could say that. Someone tried to move against one of my territories. Had to remind them why that's a poor decision. The casual mention of violence should have terrified her. Instead, Beauty found herself asking, "Did you kill them?" "No. Death is easy. Living with consequences is harder." He poured himself whiskey, downed it in one swallow. "I made sure they'll spend the rest of their lives regretting the attempt." Beauty watched him, trying to reconcile this man with the rumors, with reality, with the strange, almost gentleness he showed her in private. "You're different than I expected," she admitted. Minho turned to look at her fully. "What did you expect? A monster. You are a monster, just not in the ways I thought." His laugh was short, bitter. "At least you're honest. Most people are too afraid to say what they really think. What's the point of lying? You already know what I think." "Do I?" Minho walked toward her, and she tensed automatically, but he just sat on the opposite end of the couch, maintaining distance. "Tell me then, what do you think?" "I think," Beauty said carefully, "that you're dangerous, that you've hurt people, that you probably enjoy the power you have, that you bought me like property and justified it by calling it marriage." She met his eyes. "But I also think you could have forced this to be much worse, and you haven't. So either you're playing a long game I don't understand, or there's something human left in you. Maybe both." Minho was quiet for a long moment. "Then, you're perceptive. That's good. Stupid people don't survive in my world. You'll need that sharpness. For what? For when the novelty of defiance wears off and you have to decide what you actually want from this marriage." "I want out," Beauty said immediately. "That's not an option. Then I want to never have been in it." "Also not an option. Then what options do I have?" Minho leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying her with uncomfortable intensity. "You can keep hating me, keep fighting, keep making yourself miserable, or you can accept that this is your life now and find ways to make it bearable. Maybe even good. There's nothing good about being owned. You're not owned. You're married. That's a different cage with better amenities." His smile was sharp. "Every marriage is a cage, Beauty. At least in ours, the bars are visible." That evening, Minho insisted she join him for dinner. Not breakfast in passing, but actual dinner, sitting across from each other at the formal dining table, being served by staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Beauty picked at her food, hyper-aware of his attention, of the way his eyes tracked her every movement. "You're not eating," he observed. "I'm not hungry. You're never hungry. You're going to make yourself sick. Does it matter?" His eyes darkened. "Yes, it matters. You're my wife. Your health is my responsibility. I'm not a responsibility. I'm a prisoner. Prisoners still need to eat." They finished the meal in tense silence. When the staff cleared the table, Minho stood and offered his hand. "Walk with me." Beauty stared at his outstretched palm. Where? The terrace, fresh air, conversation without walls listening. She didn't take his hand, but she stood, following him through the penthouse to a private terrace she hadn't known existed. It overlooked the city, Seoul spreading out below them like a galaxy of light. Minho leaned against the railing, his profile sharp against the night sky. "Do you know why I agreed to your father's debt transfer?" he asked quietly. "Because you collect broken things." "No, because I saw your photograph in his file. Saw a beautiful girl who'd been working 3 jobs to support her family while still maintaining perfect grades. Saw someone who sacrificed everything for people who couldn't protect themselves." He turned to look at her. "I wanted that loyalty for myself." "That's sick," Beauty breathed. "That's honest. Most men would lie about their motivations. Pretend it was love at first sight or some romantic nonsense. I'm telling you the truth. I wanted you, so I acquired you." The bluntness was almost refreshing in its cruelty. "And now that you've acquired me, what happens when you get bored?" "I don't get bored of valuable things. And you think I'm valuable? I think you're the most interesting person I've met in a decade. I think you have fire that most people lose by your age. I think if you'd stop fighting long enough to see it, we could actually build something together." "Build what?" "A real marriage. A partnership. Something that doesn't feel like captivity." Beauty laughed, sharp and bitter. "You bought me to satisfy some twisted collector's impulse, and you think we can build a partnership. Partnerships require choice. I had no choice. You had the choice between your family's destruction and this marriage. You chose this. That's not a choice. That's coercion. Perhaps. His voice was maddeningly calm. But it's the choice you made. And now you're here. So the question isn't whether it was fair. The question is, what you do now. What I do now, Beauty said, her voice shaking with rage, is survive you. Good. Minho's smile was dark, pleased. Surviving me is harder than you think, and when you finally do, you might find you don't want to leave. She turned away from him, gripping the terrace railing hard enough to hurt. You're insane. Probably. But I'm your husband, and sooner or later, you'll stop seeing that as a threat. The following week brought unexpected changes. Minho started coming home earlier, insisted on sharing meals, asked about her studies with what seemed like genuine interest. He bought her books without asking what she wanted, somehow always choosing exactly the titles she'd been eyeing in stores. He had her favorite foods prepared for dinner, Korean and Nigerian dishes mixed together in ways that suggested he'd researched more than just her measurements. It was unsettling. This careful attention, this slow siege of consideration. She wanted to hate it, wanted to reject every gesture as manipulation. But the truth was harder to swallow. She was lonely, isolated, and Minho was the only person in this gilded cage who spoke to her like she was human. One evening, she found him in his study, working late. She'd been on her way to her room, but something made her pause in the doorway. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Do you need something? Beauty hesitated. Then, why are you being kind to me? It'd be easier if you were just cruel. Easier for who? For me. Easier to hate you. Minho set down his pen. Come here. It wasn't a command, but it wasn't quite a request either. She entered the study, keeping distance between them. I'm being kind, he said quietly, because cruelty is easy and boring, because breaking you would be simple and unsatisfying. Because I didn't marry you to destroy you, Beauty. I married you to keep you, and keeping something means maintaining its value. I'm not a thing, she said. No, you're a person, a stubborn, fierce, beautiful person who deserves better than being treated like property. So I'm treating you like my wife instead. The distinction felt important, though Beauty couldn't quite articulate why. She found herself moving closer, drawn by something she didn't want to name. You confuse me. Good. Confusion is better than fear. Why? Because confused people ask questions. Fearful people just obey. And I want you to question everything, Beauty. I want you to challenge me. I want you to be exactly who you are, even if that means fighting me every day for the rest of our lives. His honesty was disarming. She'd expected cruelty or indifference, not this strange, almost respect. What do you get out of this arrangement? She asked. Besides a beautiful wife you bought like furniture. Minho stood, walked around his desk until they were facing each other. I get someone real, someone who hasn't been bought and sold so many times they've forgotten how to be genuine. I get you, Beauty. Unfiltered and angry and absolutely yourself. That's worth more than any alliance or business deal. You're romanticizing captivity. Maybe. Or maybe I'm building something out of circumstances neither of us chose. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. You can hate me for the rest of your life, but I'm going to spend that time showing you that hate isn't your only option. By the end of the second week, something had shifted. Beauty found herself looking forward to meals with Minho, to their evening conversations on the terrace, to the way he listened when she talked about her studies or her family. She told herself it was survival instinct, making the best of an impossible situation. But late at night, alone in her guest room, she couldn't deny the truth growing in her chest. She was starting to like him, starting to see past the monster to the man underneath, and that terrified her more than anything else he could have done. The next day, Minho announced they were attending a charity gala. It's important for appearances, he explained over breakfast. The organization needs to see us as a united front. My enemies need to see that I'm stable, married, untouchable. She wanted to refuse, but she'd learned that some battles weren't worth fighting. Besides, part of her was curious about his world, about what it looked like when Seoul's underworld dressed up and pretended to be civilized. The gala was held at the Shilla Hotel, a glittering affair of designer gowns and dangerous men wearing expensive suits. Minho had sent a stylist to prepare her, and the result was breathtaking. She wore a deep emerald gown that hugged her curves perfectly, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo, diamond jewelry at her throat and wrists that probably cost more than her father's debt. When she emerged from the bedroom, Minho's expression shifted, something hungry and possessive flashing across his face before he controlled it. "You're stunning," he said quietly, offering his arm. "Shall we?" The hotel ballroom was filled with Seoul's elite, legitimate businessmen mixing with men like Minho, who controlled the city's shadows. Everyone watched them enter, whispers following in their wake. The young wife, the African bride, the girl he'd bought to settle a debt. Beauty felt their judgment like needles against her skin, but Minho's hand at the small of her back was steady, grounding. "Ignore them," he murmured. "They're jealous." "Of what?" "Of me having you, of you being brave enough to stand here when any of them would have crumbled. You say brave, I say trapped." His grip tightened slightly. "Same thing. Sometimes." They moved through the crowd, Minho introducing her to various associates and rivals. She smiled, played the role of dutiful wife, let him guide her through conversations in Korean and English. But she was aware of every eye on her, every whispered comment about her age, her background, the circumstances of their marriage. And then she saw him. A man standing near the bar, young and handsome in a way that felt deliberately crafted. He was watching her with open interest, his gaze traveling over her body in a way that made her skin crawl. Minho noticed immediately. His entire demeanor changed, tension radiating from him like heat. "Who is that?" Beauty asked quietly. "Choi Tae-yoon. One of my rivals. He's been trying to move into my territory for months, and apparently now he's trying to move on my wife." Before Beauty could respond, Tae-yoon approached, his smile sharp and predatory. "Kang Min-ho," he said in Korean, then switched to English, presumably for Beauty's benefit. "Your bride is even more beautiful than the rumors suggested. You're a lucky man." "Luck has nothing to do with it," Minho replied, his voice cold. "Beauty is my wife. You'd do well to remember that." Tae-yoon's eyes never left Beauty's face. Of course, though one wonders what a vibrant young woman like her sees in a man twice her age. Perhaps she's simply practical. The insult was deliberate, designed to provoke. Beauty felt Minho go absolutely still beside her, his hand at her waist tightening until it almost hurt. Before he could respond, Beauty spoke. "I see a man who keeps his promises," she said clearly, her accent making the words sharper. "Who protects what's his, who doesn't need to make advances on other men's wives because he's too weak to find his own." The silence that followed was absolute. Tae-yoon's smile vanished. Minho's hand relaxed slightly, and she felt something like pride radiating from him. Tae-yoon's jaw clenched. "Careful, little bird. Seoul's underworld isn't kind to women who speak out of turn." "Then it's fortunate I'm not speaking out of turn," Beauty replied. "I'm speaking as Kang Min-ho's wife, which means I speak with his authority. Unless you're suggesting my husband can't control his own wife." She glanced up at Minho. "But we both know that's not true, don't we?" Minho's smile was dangerous, delighted. "We do. Now, if you'll excuse us, Choi Tae-yoon, my wife and I have better company to keep." He guided Beauty away, and as soon as they were out of earshot, he pulled her into a quiet alcove, his hands framing her face. "That," he said, his voice rough with something intense, "was the most magnificent thing I've ever witnessed. You defended me, you claimed me. Do you have any idea what that means?" Beauty's pulse raced. "I was defending myself." "No." Minho's thumb traced her cheekbone. "You were defending us. Whether you want to admit it or not, you just declared yourself mine in front of half of Seoul's underworld. There's no taking that back." "Maybe I don't want to take it back," she whispered, shocked by her own honesty. "Maybe I'm tired of pretending this isn't real." Something ignited in Minho's eyes. "Say that again. I'm tired of pretending." His forehead touched hers. "Beauty. God. Beauty. Do you know how long I've been waiting to hear you say something like that?" She should pull away, should remember that this started with coercion and debt. But his hands on her face were so gentle, his voice so raw with want, and she was so tired of fighting feelings that grew stronger every day. "Kiss me," she heard herself say. "Show me this is real." Min-ho didn't need to be told twice. His mouth found hers in a kiss that was nothing like she'd expected. Not forceful or claiming, but desperate, reverent, like he'd been starving for her and finally been given permission to feast. She melted into him, hands fisting in his suit jacket, kissing him back with all the confusion and anger and unexpected feeling that had been building for 2 weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Min-ho rested his forehead against hers. "We're leaving. Now. What about the gala?" "Forget the gala. I need to get you home before I do something scandalous in this alcove." The car ride back to the penthouse was charged with tension. Min-ho's hand stayed on her thigh, possessive and burning through the silk of her gown. Beauty's heart raced, knowing what came next, finally ready to stop running from it. When they entered the penthouse, Min-ho pulled her close immediately, his mouth finding hers again, hungrier this time. She responded with equal fervor, years of loneliness and weeks of denial crashing together into desperate need. He lifted her easily, and she wrapped her legs around his waist as he carried her toward the master bedroom, the one she'd been avoiding, the one that would make this marriage real in ways that terrified and thrilled her. Min-ho laid her on the bed with devastating gentleness, his body covering hers. "Last chance," he whispered against her lips. "Last chance to say no, to go back to fighting me, to pretend you don't want this." "I don't want to pretend anymore," Beauty breathed. "I want you. Show me I didn't make a mistake by choosing you. Then let me worship you," he murmured. "Let me show you exactly what you mean to me, what you've meant from the moment I saw your photograph and knew I'd move heaven and hell to make you mine." And as his hands explored her body, as his mouth traced paths of heat across her skin, as he proved with touch and breath and whispered words that she was precious, wanted, cherished, Beauty finally let herself fall completely. Let herself surrender not to captivity but to possibility. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, love could grow even in the strangest soil. The fade to black was gentle, inevitable. Two people finding each other in darkness, building connection from coercion, turning a transaction into something that felt remarkably like choice. The next morning, Beauty woke wrapped in silk sheets and Min-ho's arms. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and for the first time since this marriage began, she didn't feel trapped. She felt safe. He was already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "Good morning, wife. Good morning, husband." The word felt different now, less like a chain and more like a promise. Min-ho's hand traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I need to tell you something." Beauty tensed slightly. "What?" "Your father's debt. It was erased the day we married. The threats, the protection, it's all been real. But you've been free to leave this entire time. I just didn't tell you because I was terrified you would." Shock flooded through her. "What?" "I wanted you to choose me," he said quietly. "Not because you had to, not because your family was in danger, but because you wanted to. So I let you believe the debt still existed, let you believe you were trapped. I know it was wrong. I know it was manipulation. But Beauty, I've been in love with you since that first meal where you glared at me like you wanted to poison my food. I couldn't let you go." Beauty sat up, processing. "You're saying I could have left? At any time? Yes, that I stayed because I wanted to, not because I had to." Min-ho's eyes held hers. "Yes, and that you lied to me about it." Yes, she should be furious, should feel betrayed, but instead, she felt something like relief, because it meant her growing feelings weren't Stockholm Syndrome, weren't survival instinct, were real, chosen, hers. "You're an asshole," she said finally. "I know, but you're my asshole. I am, completely, irrevocably yours." She leaned down and kissed him. "Then prove it. Spend the rest of your life proving you're worth the choice I didn't know I was making." Over the following weeks, their marriage transformed. Min-ho was attentive, affectionate, still dangerous, but directing that danger outward to protect rather than control. Beauty returned to her studies, enrolled in university, started building a life that was hers. They argued, frequently and loudly, but always resolved conflicts with conversation rather than coercion. They laughed together, exploring Seoul like tourists, Minho showing her his city through new eyes. And slowly, Beauty's family was brought into the fold. Her mother wept with relief seeing her daughter happy. Her brothers asked if Minho could teach them taekwondo, and he agreed with surprising patience. Her father apologized 1,000 times, and Beauty forgave him because holding on to anger only hurt herself. One evening, 3 months into their marriage, Minho came home looking troubled. Beauty immediately noticed. "What's wrong? There's been a threat. Against you. From who?" "Choi Tae-yoon. He hasn't forgotten the gala. He's making moves." Her blood went cold. "What kind of moves? The kind that require me to increase security. The kind that make me want to lock you in this penthouse and never let you leave. The kind that terrify me because for the first time in my life, I have something I can't bear to lose." Beauty crossed to him, took his face in her hands. "Then don't lose me. Fight for me, protect me. But don't treat me like I'm fragile. I'm your wife, your partner. Whatever comes, we face it together. Promise me, Minho. Promise we face everything together." He pulled her close. "I promise. Whatever it takes, whoever threatens you, I'll burn down Seoul before I let anyone hurt you." The threat came 2 nights later. Beauty was leaving university, Yoon waiting by the car, when a van screeched to a stop. Men poured out, moving fast, grabbing her before she could scream. Yoon fought them, but there were too many. Beauty felt a cloth pressed to her face, chemical sweetness filling her lungs, and then darkness. She woke in a warehouse, hands bound, head pounding. Tae-yoon stood over her, his smile cold. "Welcome, Mrs. Kang. Let's discuss your husband's surrender." Beauty's training kicked in. The self-defense Minho had insisted she learn, the awareness he'd cultivated. She wasn't helpless, wasn't a victim, was a woman who'd survived coercion and manipulation and came out stronger. "Minho will kill you for this," she said clearly. "I know." Tae-yoon crouched in front of her. "That's what I'm counting on. He'll come for you. He'll be emotional, reckless, and I'll destroy him in front of you before killing you both. Romantic, really. You've misjudged him," Beauty said. "And you've definitely misjudged me." Before Tae-yoon could respond, the warehouse doors exploded inward. Minho entered like an avenging angel, his security team flanking him, weapons drawn. The firefight was brief and brutal. When the smoke cleared, Tae-yoon's men were down, and Minho was cutting Beauty's bonds with shaking hands. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "Did they touch you? Did they?" "I'm fine," she assured him, shaken but fine. "You came. Of course I came." He pulled her against him. "Beauty. God. Beauty. If anything had happened to you." Tae-yoon, wounded but alive, laughed bitterly from the floor. "You're weak now, Kang. Love makes you weak." Minho looked at him with cold certainty. "No. Love makes me unstoppable, because now I have something worth burning the world for." He turned to his men. "Take him. Let the council decide his fate, and make sure everyone knows what happens to people who threaten what's mine." That night, back in the safety of their penthouse, Minho held Beauty like she might disappear. "I was terrified," he admitted. "For the first time in decades, I was truly afraid. I thought I'd lost you before proving I deserve you." "You don't have to prove anything," Beauty said. "You came for me. You saved me. That's enough." "It's not. I want to give you everything. Safety, happiness, choice. I want to give you the life you would have had if I hadn't bought you. If we'd met differently." "But we didn't meet differently," Beauty said. "We met exactly how we were supposed to, messy and wrong and complicated, and I'm choosing to stay anyway. Not because I have to, because I want to, because I love you, Minho. Somehow, impossibly, I love you." The look on his face was devastating. "Say it again. I love you," she repeated. "My dangerous, possessive, complicated husband. I love you." Minho kissed her deeply. "Then marry me again, properly this time. With your family present and your consent given freely and everything I should have offered the first time. We're already married, so we'll do it again. Vows we both mean. A wedding that isn't a transaction. Will you, Beauty, will you choose me again, knowing everything you know now?" "Yes," she breathed. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The second wedding happened a month later, small and intimate, with Beauty's family and Minho's inner circle. She wore a gown she'd chosen herself, white silk with Nigerian Ankara accents, a fusion of both their worlds. Minho wore traditional hanbok, and when they exchanged vows this time, every word was truth. "I promise to protect you," he said, "to honor your choices, to spend every day proving you didn't make a mistake by loving me." "I promise to challenge you," Beauty replied, "to never let you become complacent, to be your partner in everything, not your possession. And I promise to love you fiercely, even when you drive me crazy." When the officiant pronounced them married, again, the kiss was sweet and full of promise. And as they celebrated with people who genuinely cared about them, Beauty felt something she never expected to feel in this marriage. Complete, whole, home. 6 months later, Beauty's hand rested on her growing belly. She was 4 months pregnant, glowing with health and happiness, studying for finals while Minho worked nearby. He'd become obsessively protective since learning about the baby, but they'd negotiated boundaries. She got independence. He got the assurance of constant security. They both got a future. Neither had planned, but both desperately wanted. "You're staring again," she said without looking up from her textbook. "I can't help it." Minho moved behind her chair, his hands resting on her shoulders. "You're carrying my child. You're brilliant and beautiful and mine. I'm allowed to stare." She leaned back against him. "We've come a long way from that first night. When you thought I was broken. When I thought you'd bought a docile wife. When neither of us knew we were falling in love." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Best investment I ever made." "I'm not an investment. You're everything." Their daughter was born on a spring morning, arriving with impressive lungs and her mother's fierce spirit. Minho held her with shaking hands, this tiny, perfect person who represented everything he'd never thought he'd have. Family, love, redemption. "What should we name her?" Beauty asked, exhausted but radiant. "Hope," Minho said, "because that's what you gave me. Hope when I'd forgotten what it felt like." Beauty smiled. "Hope Adeyemi Kang. Perfect. She's perfect. You're perfect. This impossible, beautiful life we've built is perfect." "It's not perfect," Beauty corrected gently. "It's real, messy and complicated and built on the strangest foundation, but it's ours. And that makes it perfect enough." As Minho sat beside Beauty's hospital bed, their daughter sleeping in his arms, he thought about the rumors he'd planted years ago, about weakness and impotence and being untouchable, about how those lies had protected him but also isolated him, until an 18-year-old girl had mockingly whispered them in his ear on their wedding night, and he'd decided to prove every whisper wrong. Not just physically, but emotionally, by becoming the man worthy of her choice, by loving her so completely that she chose him back. Beauty watched her husband cradle their daughter and remembered the terrified girl who'd stood in a wedding dress believing she was sold into a loveless marriage, who'd thought survival meant enduring, who'd never imagined that the monster buying her would become the man she couldn't imagine living without. Life was strange like that, taking coercion and transmuting it into choice, taking fear and transforming it into love. Souls sparkled outside the hospital windows, the same city where they'd begun this journey, where a debt had become a marriage, where a marriage had become a partnership, where a partnership had become family. And as Hope yawned in her father's arms, Beauty knew with absolute certainty that every struggle, every fight, every moment of doubt had been worth it, because they'd chosen each other. Again and again, in small moments and large declarations, until the choice became permanent, carved into their hearts like vows. Minho looked at Beauty, his eyes soft with love. "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying, for fighting, for choosing me when you had every reason to run, for giving me this family, for making me human again." Beauty reached for his hand. "Thank you for proving the rumors wrong, for being patient, for letting me fall in love with you in my own time, for building a cage big enough to hold both our hearts." His laugh was quiet, reverent, some cage. Best prison I've ever been in. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter sleep, knowing that their story would sound impossible to outsiders. A girl of 18 forced to marry a 40-year-old crime lord, a transaction that became devotion, a purchase that became partnership. But impossible things happened every day in Seoul, and sometimes, just sometimes, they led to love. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Inside the hospital room, a family was born from the strangest circumstances. A husband who'd learned that power meant nothing without love, a wife who'd discovered that strength came from choosing to stay, and a daughter who would grow up knowing that even the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest futures. If you were brave enough to rewrite the ending, if you loved fiercely enough to transform cages into homes, if you chose each other, again and again, until the choice became as natural as breathing, and they did, every single day, for the rest of their perfectly imperfect lives,